Thank you, Matt. We have a great panel joining us today. I'm so happy to be able to ask questions to them, and they're extremely knowledgeable, and their thoughts are very valuable to me. So I'm so glad that they can join. First, we have Phil Manderson, chairman of the DC Council. Phil has been serving as a chairman since 2012. But he's been serving on the council since 1998. So he has seen the ups and downs of the district's finances. In fact, I believe Phil, you moved to DC back in the 70s to attend university. So you've really seen the tremendous changes the city has been through. And as the at-large council member, and then as the chairman of the council, his philosophy, legislative philosophy, has really shaped policy. And so we're really glad to have him. We also have Dr. Christina Grant, who is the state superintendent, of education in DC. Dr. Grant has started his career in education, which has over 20 years of experience, I believe, as a public school teacher in Harlem, in New York, and served in many different positions, including as the executive director of Deputy Executive Director of Department of Education in New York City, which is essentially their public school system, has that name. And then she comes from Philadelphia, where she was serving as the head of charter schools and innovation for the city of Philadelphia. And then lastly, we have Peter Anderson, who is the head of school in Washington Latin Charter School. Peter similarly has over 20 years of experience. I believe started teaching as middle school teacher and was a coach. And then he served as principal or head of school, I believe, lastly in New York City before moving to Washington Latin in 2016. So those are our panelists. I'm going to start with a question to Chairman Mandelson. I have just shared my views on what might be a concerning fiscal future for the District of Columbia. But I feel like we may not even agree whether there's a fiscal cliff or not. So I really want to get your thoughts on what you're seeing as the biggest risk starting fiscal year 2025. Where are your thoughts on this particular issue?
You're asking about the financial outlook for the city. I'm not sure I'm as pessimistic as you are, Yesim. I take some solace in the fact that the chief financial officer puts together revenue estimates that we always think are a little too conservative. And the chief financial officer does that because he doesn't want to make a mistake on the other side, which is he's too optimistic. And then suddenly we are in a lot of trouble. It is concerning nonetheless that downtown needs to recover much more. We've got the vacancy rate, which has depressed our real property tax revenues. Other tax revenues, other tax sources have been going up. And I think a lot of people have the impression with this year's budget that our revenues had dropped. That is, our revenues for next year were less than our revenues for the current year or something like that. And instead, what it is the revenue growth is just much less than we thought it would be. So it's a concerning picture. I'm not as pessimistic about it. I do think that implications with regard to school funding is that we need to be looking at one-time expenditures for one-time money, that is the ESSER money that will go away. And I suspect we'll be talking more about that.
Thank you. Peter, your school also received a lot of ESSER funding like any other LEAs. I'm curious, what are the areas that you plan to spend the remainder of your, and where have you been spending the money? What are your plans for next year? And then do you have any concerns for the following school year starting in 24-25?
Thank you. Before I answer the question, I just want to say that to BC's point earlier, DC is really unusual in that while a lot of districts have cut spending for schools, DC has actually increased funding. So it's not just the ESSER funding that we've been getting, but also the per pupil funding, which I'm really grateful to the executive, to the city council for the ways in which the city has doubled down in its investment in our students. And as far as how we've used ESSER or ESSER equivalent funds, we've used them on technology and connectivity. You know, we're not a one-to-one school before the pandemic, but now we are. And we had to enhance connectivity for families. Obviously PPE, which we don't have to spend as much on moving forward, but tutoring support, which is something that we expect that we'll continue to be spending on this coming year. Social and emotional support has been a big area of spending. We've also done some facility improvements, and we'll continue to make sure that our facilities are safe and adequate. One thing that we did, and in the earliest days of the pandemic, and ESSER funds actually helped with this, was also emergency assistance for students and staff. We had a number of students and staff members who were in desperate straits, and even with supports coming from the city, they still needed additional assistance. And we did use some of that money for that purpose. And we're continuing to see families in need, families who are having utilities cut off or other things that are making it difficult for them just to meet their basic needs. And so worried about being able to provide that support. But the areas on technology, on social and emotional support, and tutoring support are the priority areas for us for next year.
Thank you. Dr. Grant, you have one of the most difficult jobs in DC for sure. And I'm kind of curious, how are you looking at the effectiveness of some of these new programs that the city is implementing? Because you may have to have the difficult decision of cutting some that don't work and investing more in others that have been working.
Yeah, before I answer, similar to Peter, do want to say thank you, Yesim and BC and everyone gathered this morning to engage in what I think will be a series of conversations as we navigate the weeks and months ahead, particularly as we get through to the end of our recovery investments and as we think about, multiple years forward. I, like the chair, don't have quite the pessimistic view, although your opening remarks very much keep us grounded in the day-to-day realities of investments we need to make as it relates to the education of our children up against the realities of coming out of a global pandemic and the both short-term and long-term effects that we have even yet to see and uncover. And so I'm always thankful for a healthy grounding talk from the policy center, because I was like, and Yesim was going to get us right back in the conversation. But, echoing what Peter said, I'm so grateful that despite the hardness of the work, the city continues to make seismic investments in public education. And that's just not a truism that's seen across the country. So both the executive, Mayor Bowser, and this council still committed to a 5% increase in education and a pretty seismic investment in our teachers. And so we are currently in the process of allocating resources to our DCPS and public charter school teachers to ensure that compensation continues to grow and scale. And so as we get into this conversation around ESSER, it's important to name things that we have just like seismically gotten right together as a city. As a city, we reopened our school system and built one of the most comprehensive COVID testing programs in the nation, which kept our school system open. Like, we may have had to close a class or a grade, but that process, I feel like we have quick memories on just how hard it was to reopen a system, ensure public trust, get kids back in classrooms. In fact, I was at Peter's graduation last week. Was it last week? 2 weeks ago? And to see, his largest graduating class, students all on track to college, and those kids lived all of these investments. So I always want to kind of keep us grounded in just how much we've gotten right. We have historic public enrollment. And so on my side, I'm like, yep, got to get our numbers up, but also know we have more children in our system than we've ever had since we started counting our children, and a graduation rate that keeps scaling. And so in the face of insurmountable odds, DC is faring in ways that, you know, my colleagues in other jurisdictions are like, oh, wow, we are keeping our commitment to our children and making those investments. I think to your question, particularly at OSSI's side on our recovery investments, and as we look at the mayor's signature investments, and even how we are managing this work with our schools, we've been really laser focused on how are we measuring the effectiveness of all of our programs. I'll talk about high impact tutoring because it's one that Peter raised. Not only have we set aside KPIs to say that over 3 years, we wanted to serve over 10,000 children, and we are actually on target to achieving that objective. It's a $40 million investment, and we've partnered with a national partner to literally evaluate the model, the structure, how tutoring is taking place in different contexts. And we've approached this work in a different way. We didn't do two things. We didn't build a tutoring team that was full of folks at OSSI. We very much set up grants that are out in community with schools, with CBOs, and then we partnered with individuals to measure our effectiveness. So as we think about sustainability, and I'm very happy Peter is saying that he hopes that tutoring remains a part of our ecosystem as I do as well, we will be able to target and say, it is this high impact tutoring model that has had this most effective impact on this student population over time. We've been really deliberate in that type of work. I think another area which is just worth noting, is our investments in literacy. And that work has been done both with the executive and in partnership with our council, where we set up seismic investments in the science of reading and letters training, and using this one-time money to really jumpstart a very large conversation. So in addition to our comprehensive literacy grant, our educators are getting access not to just the training, but to stipends to support them in that work. We're currently engaged in the literacy task force. So the through line continues that when these one-time resources are no longer available, we will be presenting the executive and council with actual figures over time to map out what will the deep investment in literacy look like in Washington, D.C. And I think we have worked very hard to be smart about these are investments that we want to use to create data and measures and points of impact such that we could report back to our community to say, we must keep these investments to continue the academic acceleration of learning for our students. And then much like what Peter said, a lot of the early investments you've seen in our dollars were all connected to getting the school system open. So take yourself back 2 years ago where we were investing in air quality and outside learning spaces and PPE and technology. By design, lots of one-time investments that once the school year is open and once our school system is open, our children are back, we are now shifting deeply. I hope you hear every LEA talking about deep investments in accelerated learning. And those are the types of things that as we continue to collect data, by the time we get to the end of this resource, we'll be really clear about which investments sunset as a true function of coming out of a pandemic, as in they're no longer needed, and which are the investments that have shown us data and impact that we will fight together as a city to make sure that they live and breathe in our school system. And naming, I have a cold, and so if you see me like sneezing and coughing, I'm still here, except you're gonna see me sneezing and coughing.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. And Phil, you have oversight as the Committee of the Whole has oversight over our education entities. What kind of metrics will you be looking at next year or through the year as you conduct oversight over DC public schools, charter schools, OSSI, DME, all these education agencies?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it very much depends on which oversight function we're playing in. On the investments that we've made or the investments that we are implementing on behalf of the mayor, DC Futures, our Advanced Technical Center, high impact tutoring, those are investments where we are directly in charge of the KPIs. And so I can tell you the target is to serve over 10,000 students, which is 10% of our public school population. I can tell you that they are targeted to 75 of our most at-risk schools, because that's a program that we designed. And so by definition, targeting those metrics. At the Advanced Technical Center, the goal is to achieve having 500 students from high schools all across Washington, D.C., getting access to dual enrollment college credits and high wage and skill areas of study at a local university, but those, and so we can say that, last year our students exceeded our expectations. Our target was to serve 75 students. And in fact, we served 100. And, metrics that we're following, these students earned over $300,000 in college credits in one school year and had a 95% attendance rate. And so those are the types of targeted metrics as we are thinking about, all right, definitely want to keep an advanced technical center. We have realized that if we build it, our students will come, and not only will they come, but they will learn and excel. Or something like DC Futures, a scholarship program that supports last stop funding for residents. We targeted a program to serve 1,500 residents. And as we sit here today, we have 1,300 residents enrolled. And that's a post-secondary option for folks that, during the pandemic may have chosen to not pursue that next credential. And now we are really excited and fortunate to be able to offer those resources. And in each of the three examples that I framed, not only are we keeping track of metrics, data points, and like measures of success, but we're stepping back and saying, like, if we were going to do the sustainability sustained over time, how would the model have to shift? Would the model shift toward access, toward resources that could be leveraged from the funding formula? Would the model shift to directly align and be even more targeted and precise to who would have options and access and how? Or would we think about the program in a dramatically different way? So we collect data on attendance, participation, usage, and then we are partnering with organizations like the lab and the Annenberg Institute at Brown University, who are giving us feedback on these investments. That's going to be a huge part of our work as we navigate next school year and think about FY25. And we're saying these are the investments we have to keep in place as we want to. I don't want anyone to think that we will have recovered from this pandemic in 3 school years. We'll be experiencing this for many years to come.
That's great. I don't know, I want to turn to Phil and asking the same question, because Phil, you have oversight over our education agencies. How often do you use these metrics that are general part of the budget? What kinds of other data are you going to be looking at as you make decisions next year?
Thank you for the question. The goal is, in my view, improving student achievement. And the most obvious metric would be the standardized test scores. Sometimes the scores are not the best measure of knowledge. That might sound a little weird, but we can be too reliant on the test scores. I think they're important. They're an indicator. So we're going to be looking at other more intangible things. I try to visit with different schools and talk with principals and get a sense of what initiatives they're taking. But this does get back to a metric. I'm concerned about teacher retention and principal retention. If you have a lot of turnover with principals or teachers, it's going to be hard to sustain significant growth in academic achievement. So going to be looking at that. An issue that has been very important to me that we put in place that we're going to be looking at closely is budget stability in our schools. This is probably more of a DCPS issue than a charter school issue, although as I say that, I'm mindful of the fact that the charter sector has complained that funding for the two sectors has not kept pace with each other. And so that will be a concern next year, but that's getting a little bit away from achievement. Budget stability in the schools. The superintendent mentioned attendance or absenteeism. That might sound a little bit disconnected, but actually it isn't. If we want to improve academic achievement, then students kind of have to be in school. And so if there's continues to be high absenteeism, then we're going to see that we're going to continue to struggle with increasing academic achievement. So these are some of the different ways that we're going to be looking over the next year at whether we're improving academic achievement quickly enough.
Thank you so much. This is really good to know. Peter, I want to come back to you, and Chairman Anderson talked about retention, absenteeism, all of these issues. what is on your mind when you look at what's happening in your school? What are you most worried about? What is your biggest concern? Is it enrollment? Is it staffing? Is it attendance? Is it student well-being, or is it something else?
So, as I think particularly about next year, and beyond, my biggest concerns are enhancing our support for our highest need students. So making sure that our highest need students get what they need. Especially given that we have students coming to us with widely different levels of preparation. So they come to us in 5th grade, coming from, over 40 different, in some cases, more than that, different feeder schools where their experiences have been very different. So their levels of preparation vary. And so making sure that we can address those needs. Supporting student well-being. We've seen an increase in the number of students who have suffered trauma and who have extreme social and emotional challenges. And so being able to adequately support those needs. Connected to that is supporting educator well-being, because we've also seen an increase in our educators having enhanced needs for social and emotional support. And if your educators are not well, they're not going to be able to effectively serve the needs of our students. I'm really concerned about leader sustainability. We've got a number of leaders who are burning themselves out, including in my schools, and just continue to invest in leader sustainability. And then something else that I'm worried about for next year, which you might find a little unusual, is we have to raise money for facility renovation and new construction. And some of this is specific to us because we've got a new school building that we have to open to move out of temporary space. But COVID really revealed that facilities matter, whether it's something as simple as adequate ventilation systems and the ability to implement social distancing, access to technology, making sure that you have the right infrastructure in place to have a more robust use of technology, but also flexible and adaptable learning spaces. And then I think what is perhaps not emphasized enough, the importance of facilities to mental health and well-being. So whether that's access to adequate spaces for physical activity, outdoor areas for recreation, designated areas for relaxation and reflection, all of those things are critical and are going to be part of our priority for new facility innovation and renovation and construction. But all these things are things that I'm really worried about.
Thank you. It's the student and teacher well-being is connected to many other things that when students feel happy, they're more likely to attend school. As you know, attendance has been a problem, but this is not a DC issue. This has been the case nationally. Teacher retention has been a problem, again, not a DC issue, has been a problem nationally. Dr. Grant, how well do we understand the relationship between mental health programs and the actual mental health outcomes? What can OSSI do to support school leaders in this particularly tricky problem?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's top of mind. It's something that I worry about often, because a school or a school system is only as well as the educators and individuals leading it. And I was smiling when Peter was talking, because we talk about burnout all the time. And I'm concerned, or it keeps me up at night thinking about teacher retention, but I also am concerned about leader retention, head of school retention, superintendent retention, that anyone who has navigated this work over the last couple of years, really has navigated a set of challenges that I would argue, none of us learned this in graduate school. And yet we're showing up every day for our children. And I do think that there's a correlation there. The work ahead for OSSI, which you will hear about in the coming weeks and months, we've launched our strategic plan, and across two of our priorities, advancing excellence in creating strong school culture, we are trying to suss out this mental health conversation in three ways. One, we've received a federal investment grant to really promote the recruitment, retention, and selection of mental health workers. So it's one thing to say we need individuals. What's really clear is we're going to have to build our own workforce. And so how are we recruiting these individuals into the work? How are we passing resources onto our schools and having them navigate all of the processes around credentialing? I think folks will say, oh, you just need a warm, caring adult, but you actually need a warm, caring adult that's deeply trained to provide the services that students need. And two things can be true, but we have to work to build them. The second is, getting resources directly to our schools. We've set up a number of grants just on mental health, professional development, virtual coaching, et cetera. We're working with the Department of Behavioral Health now to ensure that schools can pilot out actually hiring their own individuals and thinking about credentialing barriers that may or may not exist so that schools could play a more active role in getting their quote unquote person. And then last but certainly not least is a broader conversation that we're having around school climate. We are in the final stages of procuring our first climate survey for the entire district for all of our public and public charter schools. And that's a through line to like a broader conversation. How do we have a tool that would allow us to assess where our students are, where our leaders are, and actually use data to engage in a conversation around both short-term and long-term investments. Folks will know that I'm a huge proponent of mental health and mental wellness. I don't think we talk about it enough. It is more, I think there's an adage that says like, is the village okay? And they say, well, how are the children? We can solidly say coming out of this that, our children are relentless and they have a tremendous amount of grit, but none of us are truly whole and well as we navigate what we've just experienced. And so those are three ways that we're targeting it. Investments on building out a future bench, quickly trying to set up resources to allow schools to play a different role in their provision of mental health services, and then actually thinking about school climate and a broader conversation around overall school quality, which I believe will highlight what is taking place inside of a school and what types of targeted investments do we need to make in order to truly tackle mental health needs in our system.
Thank you, Dr. Grant. Chairman Mendelson, now this school's first bill is done. It took a lot of time last year. I'm just kind of curious, what are your focus areas between now and the next budget cycle? What do you think that should be worked on education issues by the Committee on Education or Committee of the Whole?
Well, I kind of touched on this earlier when I talked about retention, teacher retention, principal retention. I think those are key areas. We'll probably have a hearing in the fall on academic achievement more generally. I'm sure we're going to have a hearing in the fall on absenteeism. We do that at least once a year. We have not seen a lot of improvement with student attendance or reducing absenteeism. What can we be doing differently there? The literacy task force is supposed to report out later this year, and we'll probably have a hearing on that. I do think that literacy is one of the keys to improving academic achievement. That may sound like stating the obvious, but we know that a lot of kids are not reading at grade level. And what can we be doing to change that? And if they are reading at grade level, then the chances are they're more likely to be attending school, and they're also more likely to be doing better in different courses. So we'll probably have a hearing on that. An area that I'm struggling with is what I would call school climate. Struggling in the sense that I haven't quite figured out how we have a hearing on improving school climate, because everybody's going to come in and say climate's great. And so what specifically are we talking about? But that is another area of concern, because I think to sort of put more explanation to what I'm saying, I think there's some schools where kids come to school and they really feel challenged to do better. And every one of them can grow up to be president of the United States or an astronaut or a world-renowned doctor. And then there are other schools where I don't think there's quite that enthusiasm or encouragement. And how can we change that? So those are areas that we're looking at. I'm going to add this. What I have seen with council members in the past is that, I think it's almost inherent to the job that we look to legislation. And I'm not sure that improving education is a function of what bill can we pass in the fall. That's not to say that there isn't some legislation that's necessary. We're going to be marking up a bill regarding the requirement for the COVID vaccine and other vaccines, and how we are ensuring the public health while at the same time not being unreasonable in our burden. So there's always room for some legislation. which gets to my last point, and that is where I want to be focusing is on improving student achievement. And it is so easy to get distracted with a lot of other issues that are important, but may not be have the most primary relationship in terms of cause and effect with academic achievement.
Peter, I'll come back to you, and this is my last round of questions. So we have a great audience. Please put in your questions in the Q&A function, and we'll try to get to them. So Peter, what are you most excited about next year in terms of the new investments that you are considering, or new programs or expanded programs? We can't hear you. Someone has to do it.
After all these years, refusing, forgetting to unmute myself. So I'm actually really excited about some of the work that we're going to be doing around adult development, adult formation, supporting our adults holistically. I hear Chairman Mendelssohn's commitment to academic achievement, and I think that's important, but I think it's one of many things that we ought to be focused on, because I don't see academic achievement as an end in itself, but I see it as a means to fuller lives, fuller humanity. I like to use the term human flourishing, which I think ought to be the focus of what we're doing in the city. How can we facilitate not just getting kids to and through college, but how can we get them to a place where they're thriving adults, where we can actually close a wealth gap in the city, where we can actually have young people who are at 40 and at 50 are having fulfilling lives. And I think to get to that place, academic achievement is one part of it, but it's also about focusing on ethical and moral development. It's about social and emotional well-being. It's about enhancing engagement and intrinsic motivation. It's about citizenship and service. It's about a lot more things that I won't get into right now. But what I'm excited about is the work that we are leaning into to provide support for adults. Because as we said before, if our adults aren't well, if they aren't whole, then we're not going to be effective with our students. So we're going to be using some of our funding to lean more deeply into how we can holistically support our adults.
Thank you. And Dr. Grant, I'll ask the same question to you.
Everything. No, it's honestly, I think, at some point we should write reflections. I don't think we're capturing enough of what we all went through. For me, it was March 13th, 2020. Like, I distinctly remember the day where the governor of Pennsylvania called and said that, like, in that instance, we had to close our school system. And we laugh and joke about those 2 weeks that turned into a lot longer. But when we reflect on how far we've come, like, I am so excited about, like, simple things. Kids are at summer camp right now. They're getting ready to go into all of our different investments around summer acceleration. If they're attending programs with GCPS or that DPR, so many of our charter LEAs are utilizing OSSI grants to have a range of summer acceleration programs. And so I'm excited about, like, what potentially could feel like a normal summer. In the fall, we are going to continue our work on leveraging our strategic plan. We are setting up a graduation requirement working group. And so we've drawn a line in the sand, and over the next 2 years, we'll be engaging in conversations to have deep, meaningful conversations around what we want our students to be able to do, know, and perform as they come out of our school system. I talked to you about our work around school climate, like this conversation around attendance. A year ago, I was like, oh, we need to change our attendance codes. We need deeper understanding of something that seems simple, like you're in school or you're not in school. It's far more complex. So now we have some 30 attendance codes that help us collect accurate data, but a climate tool actually helps us peel back layers around what's happening in and around our school system. I think about the continued academic acceleration work. We had a waiver from assessments during the pandemic. And so this actual school year is when we'll have 2 years of data, and the results that we announce in August and in September will continue to let us know, like, we have a new foundation around where our students are performing. That data will let us know, like, which investments bear fruit, where do we need to pivot? We know we need to make deep investments in math. We are aligned as a city on the investments we need to make in literacy. But I'm like geeked out about the bread and butter of the actual work, particularly at the state education agency level. We just passed historic social studies standards in this city at this time, a unanimous vote of the most progressive, forward-thinking standards that I'm excited to implement and have live and breathe in our school system. So I feel like over here at OSSI, Peter can tell you now, you guys are going to get an amazing email today all about back to school with our metrics and all of our expectations. But we're excited about having a strong start of school and like continuing the great work in the face of budget pressures and the list of hearings that the chairman just listed that I was like, oh, okay, we're going to have that. Okay, we're kicking off September strong. But excited to engage in those conversations because we're no longer like chasing COVID, right? So really excited to do the work of teaching and learning and pushing the conversation around academic excellence, which is more than just performance on standardized assessments. It's really a whole school, whole a child approach and figuring out the right ways that we lean in to support our schools at the state education agency, but really geeked out. I always say we're on a path from recovery to restoration, and I can't wait to say that we have moved from like restoration to beyond, and beyond is really navigating the future for our little Washingtonians that hopefully one day will replace all of us in these seats.
Thank you. Chairman Mendelson, you just wrapped up the budgets. So maybe this is not a very fair question, but actually I'll ask two questions. So first, what are you most excited about in terms of education investments that the council has made? And then where would you like to see more investments if possible?
We did two major moves with regard to public education and the budget for this coming year. One of them was we were able to increase money going to the charter sector for educator pay. If I remember correctly, the mayor put in around 59 million in her proposed budget, and we increased that to closer to 73 million, I think. The other change or investment or move that we made was to get substantially more money into individual DCPS schools. And we didn't increase funding to DCPS. So that wasn't where we did something to DCPS that we didn't do to the charter sector, but we directed about $29 million directly into schools. So a school like HD Cook got, I believe, $240,000 additional dollars than they had thought they would get at the beginning of the budget section. Or a school like, why am I not seeing here? Anacostia, which has been losing enrollment, and it's not going to turn around in terms of its enrollment if it keeps having its budget cut, is getting an additional $700,000. So these investments will give principals more resources with which they can focus on teaching and learning. There was another part to your question. Yeah, where I want to see more money in the future is in the at-risk rates. And what we have seen historically with regard to DCPS is that the money very quickly becomes part of the budget as opposed to supplemental to the budget. But this year we were able to keep the money separate, so it was supplemental. And what we did was we created this new weight called an at-risk concentration weight. So a school with 40% or more at-risk students, that's a significant number of at-risk students, gets additional money per pupil, and it's supplemental to their budget. And a school that has 70% or more at-risk kids gets an additional weight. That's a lot of at-risk students, and and so that's a lot more money. I believe that I'm going to say maybe somewhere around $10 million divided up among schools for at-risk students. The idea behind the at-risk funding is that it's supplemental to the budget. It's a way of getting equity in the sense of schools that have more low-income students tend to have a higher number of at-risk students and therefore need additional resources. And I have to emphasize, even though I keep talking about DCPS and the numbers I gave were on the DCPS side, this at-risk concentration weight is going to both sectors on a per pupil basis.
Thank you. There are some other investments in this budget that I am particularly excited about. For example, there's about $400,000 going to create this P20 education to workforce system that will allow us to understand better the early career outcomes of the DC public school alumni. This to me is really important. So I'm so glad it's not a big amount of money, but it's a huge step in terms of learning more about the effectiveness and ultimately the return on our $2 billion investment in education. So
We're excited about it too. We're excited about it too.
Yeah, it's very encouraging. And then I think there's about $5 million going to create a whole new system for after school programs. Again, that's really exciting because finding our work with parents tell us that they're not currently using this existing system, and finding information about after school programs is really difficult. So it's something solving a simple problem of communicating with the parents, but can have huge returns. And I think that there's some funding going into flexible schedules, a pilot program at DCPS and charters for teachers. That may be a very promising way of making the profession attractive and help reduce help improve retention in schools. So I thought that I would end on a positive note rather than giving you just yet another dismal data point.
Yes, can I add two more?
Yes, please.
I'm really excited. I mean, this was a very hard budget season, and so like kudos to all of us for navigating it, but we also were able to ensure we're standing up our educator wellness grant, which is so critically important. And so we're excited about that, but we're also excited that we'll be making investments in teacher apprenticeships. And so we did talk about our mental health challenges, but we also are aggressively addressing our teacher retention, training, and selection process. And so we're excited that we also, the executive allocated resources and council approved us building our first teacher apprenticeship program. And so I love that you are tapping on the things that don't sound like huge amounts of money in the grand scheme of our budget, but are so significant because we are continuing to build and do great work. And so we're excited about our P20 system. We're excited about the investments in teacher apprenticeship. And there are just things in the budget that are going to push us forward, even as we're navigating this reality of recovering from a pandemic, more than just like assessments and et cetera. Like these types of investments will give us data 5 years from now, 10 years from now. It'll serve DC for many years to come. So thank you for highlighting it.
Yeah, and Dr. Grant, you're right that this was a difficult budget year, so I will have to end on a negative note. I think next year will be even harder. So I'm so glad to see that our leaders, school leaders, leaders at government education agencies like Dr. Grant and our legislative leaders are thinking about this already, because it'll be important to be prepared for next year's budget. With that, I will turn to Matt and really appreciate participating in this. And I think we may have some questions. Matt, back to you.
Hey everyone, you can feel free to use the Q&A function and I will put the questions to the panel. We have one so far from Summer Ellis. As an OST provider, is there a way to get a list or recommendations of underutilized downtown spaces that we could rent for programming? And if so, whom is best to contact?
Out of school time lives in the Deputy Mayor of Education's office. So you can email Paul Kine or you could email me. Both of us are just first, last name at dc.gov, but that's where we would be able to pull a comprehensive list of providers. And that's another exciting investment. It's going to be a huge task to align all of our before care and after care programs and providers. But as Yesim said, like it's critically important. And so we're excited to be jumping in and engaging heavily in that space.
I think there was another part to that question, and that was identifying space downtown. And maybe the easiest way to do that would be to go through the bids, the downtown bid or the Golden Triangle bid, because they probably are the best single source to know of vacant space that might be available.
give people a couple more minutes if anybody has any other questions. As we're waiting to see if anybody has any questions, I just want to take the time on behalf of Education Forward DC to thank Yesim, Peter, you, Mr. Chairman, Dr. Grant, and I see we have BC who's joining us too, who probably will share his thanks as well. But we will be sharing the panel portion of this as well as Yesim's slides on our website. So you'll be able to access that later today if you want to share that broader. We have one more question that came in from Josh Boots. In a forthcoming report from Empower K-12, we find a statistically significant correlation between educator well-being index scores and student growth in math and reading. Educator wellness is important, so thank you for the investment. How can we better track promising interventions in this area?
That's a great question, Josh. Some of what we hope launching a climate survey tool will help us uncover, as we're still in a procurement stage. And so as we think about the types of questions we want to have that tool measure and ask, like a lot of the questions for the educators will be around educator wellness support, et cetera. Having these resources, at least for the time that I've been superintendent, have been critical in us even knowing how important they are and how much our educators are utilizing them. But I think the tool will allow us to collect tangible data that could align these resources. I'd love for us to be at a place where we're not, launching annual grants, but we've figured out how to sustain resources solely for educator wellness.
We have another question. What investments have been made in student mental health? How will those investments continue as ESSER funds dry up? Behavior management and safety were ongoing issues at our school this year for my elementary scholar.
Peter, let's tag team this one. I'd say on our end, we have made investments, as I said, around our behavior systems. We set up a lot of virtual coaching and different processes for our educators as they were navigating coming in and out of the pandemic. And our partnership with the Department of Behavioral Health is really working to ensure that we have behavioral health supports in every single school in our system. And it's an ongoing area where we're going to have to continuously deepen our investments. I think it's important to note that children not physically being in school for 2 years is quite challenging. And so we are continuing to see the realities of those challenges. Peter, I don't know if you want to add from like the school level, how are you all thinking about those investments?
So I actually was excited. Wasn't the first time I heard it, but when you mentioned the pilots with DBH about having more customized solutions at the school level, because while there have been resources stood up for schools to have clinicians on site, the experiences with the providers has been mixed. We haven't gotten the actual people that the resources have been made available for us to receive. And so I think that an alternative approach will be very helpful. We have made our own investments in addition to the DBH support in not only increasing the number of counselors and counseling interns, which has been another great way for us to get more support into our buildings. But we've also thought very sort of creatively around mental health support, including having wellness days where we're really focusing on thinking about holistic well-being for our young people, and really leaning into data from Panorama surveys. And I know that there's a climate survey that's going to be online, but we've used Panorama as a way of identifying areas of concern and trying to respond in some really targeted ways to those concerns.
I'm going to add to that from a budget point of view. When we had the budget before this year and in previous years, Council's been very concerned about making sure there's funding for mental health professionals in our schools. What we're seeing is that there's a capacity issue, namely that there aren't enough mental health providers. And we actually put in the budget this year a significant investment for UDC to develop a social work program in the hopes that we get more social workers available in the profession and therefore more capacity.
Matt, do you want me to quickly address the DC Futures question?
Yeah, that would be great. So for the audience to know, what do you believe is the future of the DC Futures program? Will that program continue after the federal investment comes to an end?
So it's a great question. And for those who are just learning about DC Futures for the first time, it's an $11 million investment that's providing resources for residents to attend 3 local universities. And they're receiving what we call last stop scholarship funding up to $8,000. And the unique part of DC Futures, for me, that makes it special as a first generation college graduate, is it's also providing emergency stipends and coaching. And so if any of you are first generation college goers, you know that there are a multitude of things that impact your ability to persist. And sometimes it's not always the scholarship. It is actually the coaching. It's what if you need money for a book, or you need to get from point A to point B. And so the design of the program, I believe, is very well designed, and residents are attending. When I was talking earlier about the future of ESSER investments and how we're thinking about long-term sustainability, DC Futures is one of the investments that, as we think about the overall reimagining of our high schools in the district, we would want to align resources that are a part of DC Futures to designated paths and programs that our high school students would have access to over time. So I would say stay tuned for now, but this is a program that the metrics that we have been measuring and the participation from our residents are telling us very interesting factors around who is picking what schools to measure in what areas. And $11 million is a top amount of money, is a significant amount of money, but how it is playing out in the lives of our residents, these are the types of investments that we should be aligning on making in our residents to ensure that they can get through high school to a post-secondary path and finishing them. So I'd say stay tuned, but it's top of mind as we think about the reimagining of our high schools. We're also going to have to reimagine the scholarship types of opportunities that residents have access to when they come out of our high schools in the district.
All right. I don't have any other questions in the queue. Thank you everyone who submitted some. If we have any others, feel free to share them with me and I can try and follow up and get answers to them. Oh, we've got one more. Are there any strategies that can be shared to indicate any extra investments in what students with disabilities need?
I would say, I mean, Peter, I would love for you to weigh in on this one as well. We are excited that we're going to be releasing across our system performance reports for all of our LEAs with respect to special education compliance. We've made huge investments through the pandemic on special education training, credentialing. We have micro credential programs so that our educators are well trained on how to support students with a range of needs. But Peter, I don't know if you think about specifically at the school level, are there specific types of investments that you all are thinking about?
The biggest need is in certified, experienced and qualified personnel. We just have had a really hard time finding people who are able to meet the needs that we have. And we've tried to be creative. We try to think about ways to what Dr. Grant said, trying to sort of do a DIY approach to student support, which is less than ideal. You really want people who are credentialed, who are experienced, who have the high levels of qualifications, because these are our highest need students. And so finding ways to grow that population, one of the things that we've been thinking about, we've partnered with NYU to get residents, teachers, and have gotten some student support personnel through that route. And I know in the past we've worked with urban teachers to also try and find personnel, but that is really the number one issue. Yes, we have some programs that we made investments in, and we've got some assessments to do progress monitoring, et cetera, which are all important. But the number one difference in meeting the needs of students with disabilities is having the right personnel.
That's why you're hearing us talk about the special education micro-credentialing and even the design of our teacher apprenticeship programs. Like, research shows that the average teacher teaches 20 miles away from like where they're actual teaching. And so, fun fact, our next educator workforce is sitting inside one of our high schools right now, or they're in one of our universities, but they are in the area. And so it's our collective work to make sure that they have access to training, professional development, and credentialing so that they can be the best in our schools. I think another ESSER investment that I didn't touch on, but is significantly important, is that we have a special education hub now, an actual place where residents can go and families can go to understand and navigate the special education process in the district. And we are really excited to be partnered with our ombudsman to get that work done. But those are the types of investments we made in response to what we know, both on a student parent facing side. Special education is a complex set of policies and procedures that one must navigate. And on a school facing side, it's just critically important that our educators have access to training, credential, and development, because as Peter said, like, we actually need highly trained, credentialed individuals to navigate and support our students in accurate ways.
All right, I hesitate to say there's no more questions because the last time I did, we got 3 more. So, but it looks like we are, we've exhausted the audience's questions. So again, I want to share my thanks to everyone, and then I guess I will turn it over to BC if he has any closing words.
No, just again, deep appreciation to you all, Peter, Yesim, Chairman Mendelson, Dr. Grant, for leading this conversation, for sharing your optimism, your insights, reflections on the progress and successes that we've had. Look forward to ongoing conversation, but really deeply appreciate your partnership and time today. And thanks to those who joined and participated and asked really thoughtful questions as well. Feel free to reach out if there are other things that you'd like information on. You can email Matt at matt@4dc.com. .org, excuse me, and we're looking forward to more conversations with you all in the near future. Thank you all again.